Podbean, your message amplified.
Ready to share your message with the world? Start your podcast journey with Podbean.
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 Podbean. Podbean, the AI-powered all-in-one podcast platform.
Thousands of businesses and enterprises trust Podbean to launch their podcasts.
Launch your podcast on Podbean today.
My school uses Podbean.
My church, too.
I love it. I really do.
You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium. Available on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the dark story behind Tony Hancock. So it's over to you now, Mark, for this week's comedic tale.
Anthony John Hancock was an English comedian and actor whose high profile during the 1950s and early 1960s earned him major success with his BBC series Hancock's Half Hour, which was first broadcast on radio from 1954 and then on television from 1956, in which he soon formed a strong professional and personal relationship with the comic actor Sid James. His last BBC series in 1961, just simply called Hancock, which included the well-known episodes The Blood Donor and The Radio Ham, contained some of his best remembered work, but after breaking with his scriptwriters Ray Galton and Alan Simpson later that year, his career started to decline. In early 1960, Tony Hancock appeared on the BBC's Face to Face, which was a half-hour in-depth interview programme conducted by the former Labour MP John Freeman, in which Freeman asked Hancock many soul-searching questions about his life and work, and although Hancock, who deeply admired his interviewer, felt uncomfortable with some of the questions, he answered them frankly and honestly. Tony Hancock had always been very highly self-critical, and it is often argued that this face-to-face interview heightened this tendency, which then contributed to his later difficulties, and according to his brother Roger, doing that interview was the biggest mistake that Tony had ever made, with his self-analysis being his killer. Tony Hancock continued to make regular appearances on British television until 1967, including a 50-minute show for BBC Two from the Royal Festival Hall, which was poorly received, but by then his alcoholism was seriously affecting his performance. And after two unsuccessful variety series for ABC Weekend TV, he then tried a role in a Disney film, The Adventures of Bullwhip Griffin, but was sacked after reportedly having trouble with the mock Shakespearean dialogue, and then after collapsing with acute liver failure on the 1st of January in 1967, he was told he would die within 3 months if he didn't stop drinking. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to the It's Not Raining Here Also episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, and a man with a very dark and disturbed sense of humour who has the heart of a lion and a lifetime ban from the zoo. But just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every week, usually on a Tuesday night, although occasionally on a Wednesday, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, which includes true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, the darker side of some past celebrities, and the occasional missing person that often goes unnoticed. So if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of this episode's subject that I can reply to, a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. Or if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. And if you get a few minutes, perhaps you might like to check out my social media groups and pages, including Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, which are filled daily with all things unexplained and crime. I'll put the links to some of my socials in the description. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the tea and biscuit saga surrounding the dark story behind Tony Hancock. And this week's necessary disclaimer. This story is a tale with themes of alcohol, overdosing and suicide, and may prove upsetting to some, so you listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, my brain of late has been giving me the silent treatment. But anyway, let us get back to the story. Tony Hancock was born on the 12th of May in 1924 in Southam Road, Hall Green, Birmingham, in the United Kingdom, and was the second of three sons, with his father, Jack Hancock, working for a shipping firm, and his mother, Lily Hancock, who was the daughter of a printer that served for 21 years as a director of the Birmingham City Football Club. In 1933, aged just 9, Tony Hancock's parents bought the Swanmore Villa and Lodge in Gervis Road in Dalston, which they renamed the Dalston Court Hotel, and is now which is called the Celebrity Hotel. And after his father's death in 1934, Tony Hancock and his two brothers, Colin and Roger, lived there with their mother and their stepfather, Roger Gordon Walker. In 1936, the young Anthony Hancock, at just 12 years old, was sent as a boarder to Dalston Court School in Swanage, and later, at the Bournemouth Municipal College, he learned typing and shorthand, and then applied to be a newspaper reporter in Birmingham. After leaving school at the age of 14 in 1940, he then made his stage debut in the Hall of the Church of the Sacred Heart on Richmond Hill, billed as, and I quote,
Anthony Hancock, the confidential comic.
And later that same year, Hancock then made his first professional appearance at the Labour Halls, which is now known as the Avon Social Club in Bournemouth. In 1942, during the Second World War, Tony Hancock then joined the RAF Regiment, and after failing the auditions for the Entertainment's National Service Association, or ENSA for short, he then joined the gang shows and travelled around Europe entertaining the troops, and after the war he then joined the Ralph Reeder gang shows touring production of Wings, and a few years later, in 1948, he then worked in a double act with the British film, television and stage musical director Derek Scott at the Windmill Theatre, which was a venue that helped to launch the careers of many comedians at the time, which was then followed by a favourable press review of Hancock's work in the July of 1948, saying, and I quote,
But mention must be made of a new young comedian who, with a piano partner, gives some brilliant thumbnail impressions of a dud concert party.
On a short but interesting note here, the Windmill Theatre, which is located in Great Windmill Street, London, was a variety and revue theatre best known for its new tableau vivant, which is another phrase meaning a static scene containing one or more actors or models that are stationary and silent. This form of entertainment at the Windmill began in 1932 and lasted until its reversion to a cinema in 1964. Many prominent British comedians of the post-war years, including Bruce Forsyth, Peter Sellers, Michael Bentine and Barry Cryer, to name but a few, started their careers at the Windmill. In the July of 1949, Tony Hancock was also praised for his work in the summer presentation of Flotsam's Follies at the Esplanade Concert Hall in Bognor Regis, which was followed during the Christmas of that same year by him playing in the part of Buttons in the pantomime Cinderella at the Royal Artillery in Woolwich, and in the following year, in the June of 1950, he opened in the Ocean Review at the Ocean on Clacton Pier, which ran for 3 months, and in the December of that same year, he was in pantomime again, playing the part of Jolly Jenkins, the Baron's page, at the Theatre Royal in Nottingham. From 1951 to 1952, for one series beginning on the 3rd of August in 1951, Tony Hancock was a cast member of the radio programme Educating Archie, in which he mainly played the tutor, or foil even, to its titular star, who was a ventriloquist dummy. Yes, you heard that right, a ventriloquist dummy on the radio. Simpler times. But, however you look at it, Tony Hancock's appearance in this radio show brought him national recognition, and the catchphrase that he used frequently on the show, flipping kids, became very popular, and during that time he started to make regular appearances on the BBC television light entertainment show called Kaleidoscope. But it was in 1954 when Tony Hancock was finally given his own eponymous BBC radio show called simply Hancock's Half Hour. After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at the start of Tony Hancock's personal struggles and his peak years of fame.
Ghost Planet Network, broadcasting from the other side. Ready to tune in to terror? The Ghost Planet Network is your new home for original paranormal content, streaming straight from beyond the veil. We've got it all. Spine-tingling stories, chilling documentaries, real paranormal investigations from the world's most haunted hotspots. Perfect for believers, skeptics, and anyone who loves a good scare. Join the paranormal TV revolution. Get unlimited access for just £12 per year. That's just £1 per month. Tune in now. Email us at neil.hapra@gmail.com to sign up. That's neil.haprc@gmail.com.
Going back to the June of 1950, and after a very brief courtship, Tony Hancock married the Levine fashion model Cicely Romanis. However, from 1954, his publicist, Ms. Freddie Ross, over time, became more involved in his personal life, eventually becoming his mistress, which then eventually led to him divorcing Cicely and marrying Freddie Ross in the December of 1965. However, this second marriage was a bit of a touch-and-go scenario, as during these years, Hancock was also involved with a Miss Joan Le Mesurier, who was the new wife of the Dad's Army actor John Le Mesurier, and, believe it or not, Tony Hancock's best friend and a regular supporting character from his television series. Joan Le Mesurier later described her relationship with Hancock in her book called Lady Don't Fall Backwards, saying that when her husband, John Le Mesurier, found out about his wife's affair, he actually readily forgave her, and is quoted as saying that if it had been anyone else, he would not have understood it, but with Tony Hancock, it made sense. Tony Hancock's first wife, Cicely Romanis, developed her own problems with alcohol and died from a fall in 1969. Freddie Hancock, Hancock's second wife, survived her broken marriage and resumed her career as a prominent publicist and agent in the film and television industry. And while being based in New York City for many years, she founded the East Coast chapter of BAFTA, which, as you probably already know, stands for the British Academy of Film and Television Arts. However, in the July of 1966, she took an overdose, but luckily she survived.
Podbean, your message amplified.
Ready to share your message with the world? Start your podcast journey with Podbean.
Podbean, the AI-powered all-in-one podcast platform.
Thousands of businesses and enterprises trust Podbean to launch their podcasts.
Use Podbean to record your podcast.
Use Podbean AI to optimize your podcast.
Use Podbean AI to turn your blog into a podcast.
Use Podbean to distribute your podcast everywhere.
Launch your podcast on Podbean today.
Going back again to 1954 and working with scripts written by Ray Galton and Alan Simpson, who would later pen successful sitcoms such as Steptoe and Son, Hancock's Half Hour lasted for 7 years with over 100 episodes in its radio form, and from 1956 it ran concurrently with an equally successful BBC television series of the same name. The show, of course, starred Tony Hancock as Anthony Aloysius St John Hancock, who was living at number 23 Railway Cuttings in East Cheam, with most episodes portraying his everyday life as a struggling comedian with aspirations towards being a straight actor. The radio episodes were prone to have more surreal storylines which would have been impractical on television. For example, there is an episode where Hancock buys a puppy that eventually grows to be taller than himself. Carry On star Sid James featured in both the radio and TV versions of the show, while the radio version also included regulars Bill Kerr, Moira Lister, Andre Melly, and Sid James' fellow Carry On stars Kenneth Williams and Hattie Jakes. In the UK, the series was pretty groundbreaking for its time, as it rejected the comedy variety format that was then dominating British radio, and instead used a form of comedy drawn more from everyday life, meaning, of course, the situation comedy or sitcom, as it is now referred to, with the humour coming from the characters and the circumstances in which they find themselves in. And owing to a contractual wrangle with the producer Jack Hilton, Tony Hancock also had a series on ITV simply called The Tony Hancock Show, which ran from 1956 to 1957. During the run of his BBC radio and television series, Tony Hancock became an enormous star in Britain, and unlike most other comedians at the time, he was able to clear the streets while families gathered together to listen to the much-loved and anticipated episodes. Sid James, who was an actor with considerable experience in films, became more important to the show when the television version of Hancock's Half Hour began, allowing the humour to come from the interaction between them, with James's character during the radio series often being seen as dishonest by exploiting Hancock's apparent gullibility, but in the television version there appeared to be more of a genuine friendship. However, despite this perfect lead and feed arrangement, Tony Hancock started to become anxious that his work with Sid James was turning them into more of a double act, and so he told Close Encounters in late 1959, and just after the fifth television series had finished being recorded, that he would end his professional association with Sid James after a final series. So his last BBC series, which was shown in 1961, was retitled simply to Hancock and was without Sid James. Although I think it's worth me pointing out here that it is this particular series that the two episodes, The Blood Donor and The Radio Ham, are amongst his best remembered shows. After recording an episode of Hancock called The Bowmans, and whilst returning home with his wife, Hancock was involved in a car accident and was thrown through the windscreen. Luckily, he was not badly hurt, but suffered concussion and was unable to learn his lines for The Blood Donor, which was the next show to be recorded. So this resulted in his performance being dependent on the use of teleprompters, which meant he was often seen looking away from other actors when delivering his lines, and as this method didn't seem to impact his performance, from this time onwards he came to rely on teleprompters instead of learning scripts whenever he had career difficulties. In early 1960, Tony Hancock appeared on the BBC's Face to Face, which was a half-hour in-depth interview programme conducted by the former Labour MP John Freeman, in which John Freeman asked Hancock many soul-searching questions about both his life and his work. Hancock, who deeply admired his interviewer, often appeared uncomfortable with the questions. However, he did answer them frankly and honestly, but as he has always been very highly self-critical, it is often argued that this face-to-face interview heightened this tendency, which in turn contributed to Hancock's later difficulties, and according to his brother Roger, and I quote, "It was the biggest mistake he ever made. I think it all started from that, really, self-analysis. That was his killer." With this face-to-face interview cited as evidence as Hancock's gradual ostracism of those who contributed to his success, such as Sid James and his scriptwriters Galton and Simpson. On an interesting side note here, Face to Face was a BBC interview television programme originally broadcast from 1959 and 1962, created and produced by Hugh Burnett and ran for 35 episodes. The insightful and often probing style of the interviewer, who was the former politician John Freeman, separated it from other programmes of that nature and of that time. John Freeman's face was almost never shown apart from showing the back of his head, and the cameras were concentrated on the subject or interviewee, sometimes concentrating on a nervously smoked cigarette or a close-up of their face, with the titles for each episode featuring caricatures of that week's guests drawn by the Polish expressionist Felix Topolsky. In 1961, Tony Hancock had his first starring role in a feature film called The Rebel, in which he plays the role of an office worker turned artist who finds himself successful after a move to Paris, but only as a result of mistaken identity. And although the film was a success in Britain, unfortunately it was not very well received in the United States and was not well received by the American critics. According to Tony Hancock's agent at the time, a Ms. Beryl Virtue, the breakup with his writers, Galton and Simpson, took place at a meeting held in the October of 1961, where he also broke his working relationship with her, with Alan Simpson remembering that this breakup occurred during a telephone call, which was particularly painful as during the previous 6 months the writers, Galton and Simpson, had already developed, and without any payment or consultation with the comedian, 3 scripts for Hancock's second starring film vehicle. However, with Hancock being worried that the projects were wrong for him, the first 2 scripts had been abandoned incomplete, and although the third script was written to completion at the writer's insistence, Hancock rejected that one as well. But it was suspected by the writers that he probably hadn't read any of the scripts anyway. The result of this breakup was so that Tony Hancock could develop something separately that he had previously discussed with Galton and Simpson, which then became his second feature film called The Punch and Judy Man, for which Hancock hired a different writer, a man named Philip Oakes, who moved in with the comedian to co-write the screenplay. But on a short note here, the writers Galton and Simpson, although they were probably a little gutted by what Tony had done to them, it didn't really hurt their career none, as the writers then went on to pen the very successful sitcom called Steptoe and Son, amongst many other gems. In the 1963 film The Punch and Judy Man, Tony Hancock plays Wally Pinner, who is a struggling seaside entertainer who dreams of a better life, with the actress Sylvia Sims, who plays his nagging social climber of a wife, Delia Pinner, along with his good friend, the aforementioned John the Measurer, as Charles Arthur Ford, who is a sand sculptor. As with Hancock's first film, The Rebel, from 1961, the film received mixed reviews, but most of them were not being incredibly positive. For example, an Australian movie magazine called Filming dubbed it, and I quote,
"The film Hancock did after sacking his writers, which no one really likes."
After this second short break, in part 3 we will look at the further decline of our hero and his eventual suicide.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk, or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
After dispensing with the pen services of Galton and Simpson, and after recording a couple of failed series for BBC, Tony Hancock's career gradually drifted into stagnancy, and he then moved over to ATV with different writers. His drinking was out of control, his marriage had collapsed, his appearance was seen to be visibly struggling, TV executives who were getting fed up with turning a blind eye to his chaotic behaviour were losing patience fast, and his friends who offered to help him were being ignored. One of his original writers and friend, Ray Galton, said regarding Tony Hancock that he was a joy to write for, and that, and I quote, "We never had any problems with him. He was a pussycat." While the late actor June Whitfield said of him, and again I quote,
"He was his own worst enemy."
She recalled, whilst recording a series with him and sitting in the waiting room waiting for their cue, that Hancock seemed distracted and morose and started brooding about the point of his life and career, saying, and again I quote,
"He looked at me and said, 'What is it all about, eh?' I said, 'I've no idea, Tony, but we're on in 5 minutes.' He was a lovely man, but I don't think he ever realised how much everyone thought of him."
In the early part of 1963, Tony Hancock had featured in newspaper advertisements and posters in a spoof Hancock report that was hired by the chairman of British Railways, Lord Beeching, to promote his plan to reduce railway mileage, with the pamphlet itself entitled "The Truth About the Railways, the Hancock Report," being published by the British Railways Board. Hancock reportedly wanted to be paid the same as Lord Beeching's annual salary of £34,000. However, he was offered half that amount for his services. Then, again in the early half of 1963, Tony's ATV series was transmitted and, as fate would have it, was shown on the same evenings of the second series of Steptoe and Son, which of course was written by Hancock's former writers Galton and Simpson, so the critical comparisons did not bode well for Hancock's show. In and around 1965, Tony Hancock then made a series of 11 television commercials for the Egg Marketing Board, starring in the adverts with the late actress Patricia Hayes as the character of Mrs. Cravat, which she originally brought to life in the television broadcast of Hancock's Half Hour, in an attempt to revive the Galton and Simpson style of scripts, and in 1967 he did a 50-minute show for BBC Two from the Royal Festival Hall, where unfortunately he was poorly received, but by then his alcoholism was seriously affecting his performances, and after 2 more unsuccessful variety series for ABC Weekend TV, meaning the Blackpool Show in 1966 and Hancock's in 1967, this was his last work for British television. He then had a role in a Disney film called The Adventures of Bulwark Griffin, but he was sacked after he reportedly had trouble with the mock Shakespearean dialogue, and soon after this, on the 1st of January in 1967, he collapsed with acute liver failure and was told that he would die within 3 months if he continued drinking. Then in the December of that same year, while recovering from a broken rib after a drunken fall, he became ill with pneumonia. Tony Hancock's final television appearances were in Australia under a contract to make a 13-part series for the Australian commercial free-to-air television channel called 7 Network, with this being his last chance to start again. He moved into a small flat in the suburb of Bellevue in Sydney, with his flat being in the same complex as the home of the TV producer Eddie Joffe and his wife Myrtle, who had only recently left the UK too to work in Australia. The top Aussie comedy writer of the time, Hugh Stuckey, was drafted in to help the drunken Hancock with the scripts, later saying that he felt less like a writer and more like a minder, and so unfortunately Tony Hancock blew his last chance, and after arriving in Australia in the March of 1968, he only completed 3 programmes before his death, which remained unaired for nearly 4 years. By the mid-June of 1968, a few days before his death, Tony Hancock entered into a deep depression after learning that his second wife, Freddie, had obtained a divorce from him on the grounds of cruelty and adultery. And when Myrtle went to wake him up on the 25th of June, she found him lying on the bed in his underwear with an empty vodka bottle by his side and a scattering of amobarbital tablets. In his hand he was still holding the pen that he had written his final words, with one note asking for love to be sent to his mother, and the other note saying, and I quote, "Things just seem to go wrong too many times." Tony Hancock was just 44 years old when he committed suicide. His ashes were taken back to England by the late satirist Willie Rushton and were buried in St Dunstan's Church in Cranford, London. In 1989, when asked about his relationship with Tony Hancock, Spike Milligan commented that, and I quote, "Very difficult man to get on with. He used to drink too excessively. You felt sorry for him. He ended up on his own. I thought, he's got rid of everybody else. He's going to get rid of himself." And he did. And the last time Sid James saw his one-time comedy partner of Hancock's Half Hour was just months before his death, telling an interviewer that while he was driving down Piccadilly, he spotted the dishevelled Hancock stumbling along the pavement, saying that, and I quote, "He looked dreadful. I tried to pull up and get over to him. I got to the car, but by then he'd disappeared. He was so full of liquor he didn't see me. I wish to God I'd been able to catch him, because little things like that can change people's lives." The Tony Hancock Appreciation Society, or FAS for short, was formed in 1976 and is still attracting new members even today, supplying them with 2 magazines a year along with an annual reunion dinner. It also has an extensive archive held in the safekeeping of De Montfort University in Leicester, with the Society's patrons being Lucy Hancock, who is Tony Hancock's great niece, along with Kevin McNally, who played the lead role in the radio show called The Missing Hancocks. And if you ever get the chance to take a trip out to Birmingham one day, which is of course the lad's birthplace, there is a sculpture by Bruce Williams which was established in Hancock's honour in 1996 in the Old Square in Corporation Street.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 169, we are going to be looking at Jacobo Grimberg, living and disappearing in the Matrix. Jacobo Grimberg Zalberbaum was a Mexican neurophysiologist and psychologist who studied Mexican shamanism, Eastern disciplines, meditation, astrology, and telepathy through the scientific method. However, Grimberg disappeared in the December of 1994. There are many conspiracy theories surrounding Grimberg's disappearance, with one of them implying that the CIA caused his disappearance because his studies put in danger the pharmaceutical and medical industry.
This show was written and produced by myself, written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations of all the name and places was all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff of the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley, and of course a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you do know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters, and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I will see what I can do. I'll also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast if they're happy for me to do so, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. No AI was used or harmed in the making of this or any other episode of Mark's Unexplained World. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.